So in Acts chapter 27, we see when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. All right, what is a band? It's not a musical band. All right, it's not a garage band. This is Augustus's band. What is a band? When we see that, it's a military term. What does that mean? How many? A band is a specific number of soldiers. A lot more than that. A lot more than that. A lot more than that. 600, correct. It's 1/10 of a legion, 600. A band, the Greek word translated band there is cohort, and a cohort in the Roman legion consisted of 600 men. A Roman legion consisted of about 6,000 men, and the centurions, there were 100 centurions of differing ranks and levels, and to be the centurion, it says there, unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. So it doesn't say the centurion of Augustus's band. If it did, then we'd automatically know that he was the head of this band and would have had a number of centurions reporting underneath him. Would have had at least 10 reporting underneath him. So, but he is just a centurion. He's assigned to Augustus's band. Probably from the 10th Legion was one that was usually stationed in that area. And so he is charged with taking Paul and a few other prisoners back to Rome, back to Italy to stand trial. And so verse 2, and entering into a ship of I hate when they hyphenate right in the middle of these hard words. A dramatium we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus of Macedonian, a Macedonia of Thessalonica being with us. All right, and so we know who is on this trip. It's Paul. Paul is joined by Aristarchus, who is a fellow laborer from Thessalonica. He is mentioned in other places in Scripture as well, and we know that Luke is with this group. And how do we know that Luke is on this voyage? Right. He's using the pronoun we, us. He's not using the pronoun they or them, which would indicate that he is not with them. And so you see on and off throughout the book of Acts, Luke is the writer of the book of Acts. When he is with them, it's we and us. And when he's not with them, it's they and them. And so that's how you know whether Luke has joined the group or has not joined the group. We know that Luke has now joined the group, and he's going to sail with Aristarchus and Paul and the other prisoners and Julius and the soldiers that went with them back to Rome. Verse 3, and the next day we touched at Sidon. So they left basically from the coast, sailed out of Caesarea Maritima. They hit Sidon for a brief visit. Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. All right, so Paul's being well treated. He's really not a prisoner in the same sense that the other prisoners are prisoners. Paul's only a prisoner because he chose to appeal. Felix and Festus both would have let him go, but he made an appeal. And if he dropped the appeal, he would have been set free. But he didn't drop the appeal. He wanted to go to Rome, and so he's using the appeal to get him there. But Julius is kind to Paul. I think understands his legal situation, understands he's not really accused of any Roman crimes, and thus that this is kind of more of a nuisance than anything else. And so they get to Sidon, a short trip just up from Caesarea up a little bit further north of Sidon, and then Paul gets a chance to visit some friends, get refreshed. And then verse 4, when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And so when it talks about sailing under Cyprus, it's actually not to the south of Cyprus, it's to the north of Cyprus. Generally, ships going that way, sailing from Sidon, would take a straight trip underneath Cyprus and go to the south of it, but they had to follow up along the coastline because the winds were so contrary. So they had to take the long way around, and was not the convenient route. So just because the Bible uses the phrase under does not mean they went to the south of it. That's an American way of thinking about direction. So we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. Verse 5, and when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. So they get to Myra, and there, verse 6, the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us thereon. And so, a very common trading route, very common voyage was from Alexandria to Rome, actually, and probably, the expectation was this ship is going to go hit Alexandria and then shoot up and go straight to Rome, and it would be a bigger ship than some of the smaller ones they've been sailing on to this point. This would be their version of an ocean-going vessel versus a smaller seafaring vessel. Even though they're on the Mediterranean Sea, to them that was as good as an ocean. The big oceans they didn't mess with. Mediterranean Sea was about the closest thing to ocean they dealt with, and so bigger ships generally traversed and made the longer voyages from major ports to major ports. This ship is based out of Alexandria, and one of their routes probably was to shoot up, hit this in Myra, and then just sail around direct to Italy. The smaller vessels would be making stops routinely to take on more supplies because they can't carry enough supplies for a long voyage. And so they would stop every few days at these small ports, just moving their freight and then taking on new supplies, picking up whatever jobs they could as they traded and as they did their commerce. So, verse 7, when we had sailed slowly many days and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering or allowing us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmone. And so, the expectation was, again, that they would come out of Myra, they would sail around Crete in the open waters, moving quickly on a large vessel, and that they would make it over to Italy in a very direct route. It's like the difference between flying some of the airlines and Southwest. Southwest stops everywhere somebody waves a $20 bill out in a cornfield. I look up flights from time to time, and like going out for leadership conference and flying out to LA. And it's like, well, we could take you from Columbus and then take you to Philadelphia, and then you can go to New York and then fly direct to LA. And I think I could ride my bike to LA quicker than that. And so one time I can't remember where it was. Where was I flying to? I think I was flying to Detroit or Chicago or something like that. I was trying to go north, and the first route, it was like going to take me to Phoenix and then back over to here. And it's like, I don't want to tour the country. I'm just, it's a 5-hour drive. You're talking now a 7-hour flight, just instead of a 5-hour drive. So the Southwest has some interesting routes you can take if you really want to. And so that's kind of what's happening now to them. Instead of getting that direct, quick route, they end up again sailing under Crete, which again doesn't mean underneath it to the south of it. They're actually sailing in the shallower waters near the coast to the north of it, which is not the preferred route. It's the slow route, it's not the fast route. And so, verse 8, and hardly passing it, came into a place which is called Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lycia. And so they they do make it to Fair Havens, which is kind of on the would that be the northeast corner of the island of Crete. And it was a town where they could take on some new supplies. They could do whatever, and so they decide to. For whatever reason, because the weather just prevented them from taking the direct route. Um, Now they just took a bunch of time and spent it in port. And it says in verse 9, when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. And this is, Paul is referring here at the fast of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So these events are taking place in October. Yom Kippur is almost always in October on our calendar, of around 59 AD. And so, what season generally comes after October? In October, what season are we now looking ahead to? Yeah, we're starting to think about winter. Well, winter's not a great time to sail. In the Mediterranean Sea or anywhere else not near the equator. Uh, it's just not a great time to sail. And so they spent too much time. They got all the way through Yom Kippur, and now they were wanting to get going again. But now it is like this isn't sailing weather anymore. A lot of these ships go into port and they don't go very far, if at all. They hug the coastline most of the time. So going through the open sea over to Italy is not something that is advised. It's ill-advised to make that journey. It says in verse 10, and said, it says, now when the time was spent, when sailing was now dangerous because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. He warned them. Verse 10, and said unto them, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Paul said, I'm not a sailor, but I know some things and I have a sense about these things. And he said, I just telling you, if we make this voyage, there's going to be loss of the cargo, damage to the ship, and put all of our lives in jeopardy. This is an unnecessary trip. Remember, Paul is the one appealing to go to Caesar, so it's not like Paul is, trying to get out of appearing before Caesar. He's the one who wants to go appeal to Caesar. All he has to do is drop his appeal, and he probably could have been free. So Paul has no dog in this fight as far as he's just trying to find a way out of this. Well, Julius let him go visit his friends while they were inside, and he didn't run away. And they spent quite a bit of time in the Fair Havens, and Paul didn't run away. It's unlikely. Paul's just trying to get out of this. Paul's just using the godly wisdom that God has given him, and he says, this is going to be a disaster if we do it. Verse 11, nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. Well, the centurion's obviously not a Navy man himself. He's a soldier. He's in the infantry. And so he's looking at this thing and he doesn't know what to do. Paul's like, if we do this, it's going to be a disaster. I'm just telling you guys, the Lord I just have this. I just know it's going to be a disaster. I'm trying to warn you, tell you. And the owner of the ship and the master of the ship are like, no, we've done this before. It'll be okay. We'll be fine. So verse 12, and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, where commodious means convenient, it wasn't a great place to spend the winter in. It wasn't a bad place, but it wasn't, if you had to spend the next 4 months somewhere, this was not the place you would choose. Wasn't a very Roman city. There wasn't a lot of accommodations and conveniences there, and they're on an island. It's not like they could, if they were stuck at Myra there, and they were not going to be able to sail for 4 months, they could have then proceeded on Roman roads and made their way back, taken a short hop across the straits from Greece into Italy, and made it. But they're not. They're stuck on the island of Crete, and nobody wants to be there all winter long. And so, verse 12, again, because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also. So everyone's like, yeah, we don't want to spend all winter here. Let's just go and see what happens. This is, who wants to stay in, the Motel 6 for the entire winter? Let's get to Rome. They've got the Marriott there. There's some great places to stay there. And so it goes on to say, if by any means they might attain to Phenice, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. And I have a note in my notes here that about Phenice. Let me see what verse are we in again? I'm on the wrong page. That would explain my confusion there. Um, so it's not. The city is yeah, okay. So this Phenis is not the country of Phoenicia. Some people think it's an abbreviation for that. This is just a city on the southwest side of Crete. So they went from the northeast corner around to the southwest corner of the island of Crete. Again, picked up whatever, maybe supplies or maybe some extra cargo or something like that, and then they head off. And here we go. We're on our trip. Verse 13. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. So they're in this little town of Phenis, this little port city, picking up whatever they need. The wind changes. The wind is favorable. It's looking great. And they say, see, it's going to be wonderful. Let's go. So they loose and they go. And here we are. We're heading to Rome. And they sailed close by Crete, verse 14. But not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. And so it didn't take long for everything to go off the rails here. This was a nor'easter which swept down from the high mountains of Crete, and it was basically a small hurricane, and it just pushed the ship completely off course. So I mean, it was dark; they couldn't see the stars. The wind was blowing. They're just really at the mercy of this storm. And verse 15, and when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive, meaning we were trying to steer the ship with the sails, and then we just decided we're just going to let the wind blow us wherever it blows. Verse 16, running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. And so these type of boats often would have a smaller boat attached to it. So if they needed to, if they couldn't get their big boat into a port or something like that, they could use the smaller boat to offload. They could also use that to carry extra supplies, and it could also serve as a life raft if something went terribly wrong with the boat. So they're trying to get that smaller boat up into the boat and in the bigger boat, and that it's not working. Verse 17, which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship. So what they're doing now is they're putting throwing ropes underneath the ship, and they're basically putting ropes to reinforce the hull of the ship so the hull doesn't break up. And that's what that terminology refers to. And fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, struck sail, and so were driven. So they were being blown so far south that there are a lot of sandbars off the coast of Africa, and they were being blown so far off course. They thought they thought there's a real danger of hitting one of these sandbars down there. So they just tucked the sails in completely and just instead of the wind blowing them around, they just let the boat bob on the waves. And this was not a small storm, and it wasn't a quick storm either. Verse 18, and we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, meaning they were all barfing overboard, the next day they lightened the ship. So now they start throwing the cargo off. The lighten the ship means that they were throwing the cargo off, trying to keep the ship more buoyant so that it doesn't sink, start taking on water. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. So now they're throwing away all the equipment they don't absolutely need. They're getting everything off the ship that they absolutely don't have to have. Doing everything they can. This tells you how serious of a situation this is. This is a big economic loss to this captain. It seems like somebody said something about that. But verse 20, and when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. It just went on day after day after day after day. They couldn't tell where they were. They were in the storm. They couldn't go where they wanted to go. They were stuck bobbing up and down for day after day after day. They've done everything that they can to preserve the ship, make sure the ship survives, thrown off everything they didn't need. And day after day after day keeps going by, and this storm is not letting up. And And so, I mean, they're all basically giving up hope. Verse 21. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, I told you so. He said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me, which is his way of saying, I told you so. And have not and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. So Paul bit his tongue for a while, quite a while, a long abstinence he went. And then he comes popping up onto the deck of the ship when everybody's at their lowest point, and he says, you should have listened to me. I tried to warn you. This is all your fault. It's not my fault. It's your fault. I warned you. You ignored me. Here we are. Now do you believe me? Okay. So, verse 22, now I exhort you to be of good cheer. Well, that's not the unexpected second statement. I told you, look at the mess we're in. Everybody's given up hope. But don't worry, be happy. For there shall be no loss of any man's life among you but of the ship. We're going to lose the ship, fellas. You lost everything on the ship. Now we're going to lose the ship, but nobody's going to die in this. And how do I know that? Verse 23, for there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. So he said, I have God's word on it that nobody on this ship is going to die. But I'm telling you, the boat's going to be a loss. The cargo is going to be a loss. And again, I told you so. You should have listened to me. I know things. Verse 25, wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. All right, here, you guys should just cheer up. It's going to be okay. Nobody's going to die. Everybody thinks we're going to die, but nobody's going to die because I believe God. God promised. I believe God. You should believe. Can't believe God. Believe me, like you should have believed me before we left in the first place. Verse 26, howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. But when the 14th night was come, 2 weeks they've been stuck in the storm. As we were driven up and down in Adria about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. They had no idea where they were. They hadn't seen the stars in 2 weeks. So they have no idea where they have gone. I mean, that can be a fairly scary thing. It's not the norm when you're sailing. I mean, we don't understand that because we have all these highway signs and mile markers and we got all that stuff. Imagine driving for 2 weeks on roads and you don't know if you're going north or south or east or west, and there's no signs to guide you, and you're just starting to come up on something and you don't know what it is or where it is. That can be unnerving a little bit. So verse 28, they sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. So the water's getting more and more shallow, which indicates that they're getting closer and closer to land. 19 or 29, then fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out the stern and wished for the day. So, they're getting closer and closer. The danger is that they're going to get blown up and run aground, and that's not a good thing for a ship to be. And so they drop all 4 of the anchors that the ship has to try and lock it into place. Doesn't work. They were just hoping the storm would pass, hoping the sun would come out. They could pull up anchors and they could figure out where they are, where they're going, and save the ship and save everything else, whatever's left. Verse 30, and as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea, that's that small boat we were talking about, under color as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. So some of the soldiers were going to desert. They had had enough. They were going to abandon ship. They were going to leave everyone behind. They were going to take the lifeboat, and they were making a run for it. They had had enough. But they were saying, oh yeah, we're going to go down. We're going to check the anchors, make sure the anchor's all set. We're going to, go around the outside of the ship, take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. But Paul knew that wasn't what was going to happen. And so, verse 31, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. So he said, if you get out of the boat, you're done. You can't be saved. You have to stay in the boat if you want to be saved. Verse 32, then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So, some of these shipmen that wanted to abandon ship, I think I said soldiers, but shipmen, the ones who worked for the ship and the captain, we're gonna bail out. And so the soldiers went and cut the ropes and let that boat just drift off. So now we're all stuck here on the ship together. Verse 33, and while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. So they were, they had thrown a lot of the supplies overboard. They kept a bare minimum of food on board, and so they were basically not eating. They might not have been eating because they were all so seasick from bobbing up and down day after day, hour after hour, that they probably couldn't eat a whole lot. But for 14 days, they'd basically been fasting. And Paul says everybody's going to need to eat and get their strength back up now. And so, verse 34, wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. I don't know what Paul prayed, but now all of a sudden they've gone from we're all going to die to, hey, all right, this might work out. This guy seems real confident. He seems, his God seems to be telling him something, and so far he's batting 1,000. So he says to eat, let's eat. That's kind of the attitude they have there. Verse 37, and we were in all the ship 260 souls. Again, this is a big ship. This is not one of the little ships that's supposed to hug the coast. This is an ocean ferrying vessel. There are a lot of people on this ship. Okay, so it's important that you get this picture in your head. They had a smaller boat that that they could go down in, and they could go around and work on the ship or do things with the ship. That small ship was necessary, but this is a big boat, and so there were 276 souls on that ship. That's about the number of people you get in a 737. Verse 38, and when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. So now all the food's overboard. Everybody ate. We got their last meal in them. Chucked the rest over the side because we're going to need to be as light as possible. Verse 39, and when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. So again, this is a massive ship. It's got a lot of people that live on this ship. They're literally at the end of their rope. And so the sun comes up, they're looking around, they're like, anybody recognize this? No, don't recognize it. Well, there's kind of an inlet there, that kind of a river, a creek that comes in. What if we drive the ship up into that and run it aground there? It would be safe. We wouldn't crash into the rocks. We could all, get out of the ship and be saved, and then figure out what we have to do with this big ship after that. So verse 40, and when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken in the violence of the water. So this was kind of the worst case scenario. They didn't get to where they were going. They were trying, and where these two seas come together, where the flows come together, there was just kind of a buildup of rocks there. And they got the front part of that ship stuck in there like it was in concrete, and the back part of the ship was free to, get slapped around. And it just started working on that boat, and it started coming apart. And they weren't not as close to land as they were trying to get when this happened. So this was another failed attempt here. Verse 42, and the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. All right. Why is that necessary? Exactly. If you lost a prisoner, if you were a Roman soldier, jailer, guard, and you lost a prisoner, you paid for it with your life. And so if any of these guys had drowned, well, you bring the body back with you and say, hey, we had a shipwreck, the guy drowned. But if they escaped and you couldn't bring a body back, well, then you'd be executed for dereliction of duty. It was a great motivating tool that the Roman army had. They didn't lose a lot of prisoners. Um, it was just not. You were just motivated to watch them carefully. Um, and so the centurion, verse 43, but the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. So centurion says, we're not killing the prisoners, because he wanted to hang on. He wanted to save Paul. He didn't think Paul deserved to die. And of course, this is God's purpose at work again. Paul knew God had a purpose and plan, and his purpose and plan was to stand before Caesar, not to be executed there on this boat that's coming apart. And so he said, who are the good swimmers? You get out first, you swim to shore, and then you stand guard, and we'll send all the prisoners out next and let them swim. And when they get there, we'll have guards there to keep them under guard. That was the strategy, short of killing them all, bringing the bodies back and saying, well, we didn't lose them. They're dead, but we didn't lose them. Rome never really cared much if their prisoners were dead or alive. They just never did care. Most Roman prisons, if you were in the Roman prison, depending on the crime or what prison, Rome didn't even feed you. Your family was responsible to come bring you food. If they didn't, you starved to death. They didn't care. I mean, you're in jail. That's not our problem. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to eat. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to take care of your own personal needs. That's not our job. Take care. We're not giving you cable TV. There's no weight room. There's no library. You're just going to be in here until you die, or until we let you out. Verse 44, and the rest, yes, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. So the swimmers swam. The ship is coming apart. There's pieces of the ship floating all over the place. The swimmers swam, got to shore safely. And some of them obviously would have included some of the soldiers, and ready to guard. And then the people who couldn't swim, they were giving them, here's a piece of wood, here's a piece of wood, something that would float, and here it is. This is your life preserver. Guard it with your life, because you need that. And so on boards and broken pieces of the ship, they all make it to land. Verse 20, chapter 28. And when they were escaped, then they knew that the island was called Melita. So it took them till they actually got on the island. And, they saw the welcome center there where it said, welcome to Melita. And there were brochures there for different attractions and accommodations, and, where they could go shopping and that kind of a thing there. We're in Melita. Yes. So we'll quit there for the night. So they're on. It's in the Greek. It's Melita. I will mention it's Malta, the island of Malta. Today is what we call it. So we will go through the remainder of, I think, chapter 28 next week, and finish up the study of the book of Acts here. So any questions